Rain hammered the porch the night Amara Wilson stood outside her
You are
mother's
no
house
daughter
in
of
Atlanta.
mine.
3-month-old Kofi screaming against her chest, nowhere left to go. Her father's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Her mother's hands still shook from the slap. Behind the cracked door, her little sisters watched in silence. "You are no daughter of mine," he said. The door shut. The deadbolt slid home. That quiet click would live in Amara's head forever. She looked down at the thin blanket wrapped around her son and made herself one promise. Whatever came next, they would survive it. She did not yet know that across town, in a gated compound, a line of black SUVs was already rolling out, and the man leading them had spent every day since she disappeared trying to find her. If you're watching this tonight, wherever you are, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if stories like this one pull you in, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, because you do not want to miss where this one goes. Amara was 23 years old, and until 6 months before that night, she had been the pride of her family. She was the one who finished her associate's degree with honours while working full-time, the one who sent money home to help with her mother's medical bills, the one her mother bragged about to the other women at church. She was quiet, careful, the kind of young woman who thought twice before she spoke once. That was what made the whispers so devastating when they started, because nobody could quite believe that Amara, of all people, had let herself fall the way she did. His name was Malik. He had shown up at the coffee shop where she worked the way storms arrive, suddenly, and changing everything they touched. He said he was in town on business, something in logistics, and for a while that was believable enough. He had a way of listening that made Amara feel like the only person in a crowded room. He remembered small things she mentioned once in passing, that she hated the smell of overripe mangoes, that she wanted to see the ocean before she turned 30, that her father's approval mattered to her more than she liked to admit. Within 4 months, she loved him in the reckless, all-consuming way that only happens once, if it happens at all. Then, without warning, he was gone. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. One week he was walking her home after her shift, laughing at something she'd said, and the next week his apartment above the barber shop was empty, the landlord shrugging when she asked, saying only that a car had come for him in the night and he had left in a hurry, looking, in the landlord's words, like a man running from something or running to it. 2 months later, Amara understood why her body had been betraying her with sickness in the mornings. She told her parents the truth because she did not know how to do anything else. Her mother wept. Her father raged. The neighbours, who had once smiled and waved, began to look away when she passed, and the whispers followed her like a second shadow. The girl who let a stranger use her and vanish, the girl who was too foolish to ask the right questions, the girl who brought shame into a respectable house. When Kofi was born, small and furious and beautiful, Amara believed for a moment that his tiny face might soften something in her father's heart. Instead, 3 months later, it was her father who opened the door on that storming night and told her she was no longer welcome inside it. She had a little over $400 to her name, a duffel bag of clothes, a baby who would not stop crying, and absolutely no one left to call. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Malik had not run from her at all. He had been taken. If this is already pulling at something in your chest, go ahead and drop a like on this video right now. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Amara spent that first night huddled in the doorway of a closed laundromat 2 blocks from her parents' house, rocking Kofi against the cold, whispering apologies to him for a life she never intended to give him. By morning, a woman named Efua, who owned a small soul food spot on the corner, found her there, half frozen, and without asking a single question, took her in. In exchange for a cot in the back storeroom and 2 meals a day, Amara began waking before dawn to prep vegetables, wash dishes, and stock the counter. It was grueling work, but it was safety, and safety was more than she'd had the night before. Word travels fast in a tight-knit community, and it did not take long for people to learn where the disgraced Wilson girl had landed. Some came to gawk, a few came to help, quietly, ashamed to be seen doing so. Most simply talked. Amara learned to let the words pass through her like wind through cloth because she had discovered something in that first brutal week that no one had ever told her about motherhood. That love, real love, has a way of burning away everything that isn't essential. She stopped caring what people thought of her. She only cared whether Kofi was fed, whether he was warm, whether he was breathing steady in his sleep. Months passed this way. Amara saved every dollar she could. She picked up a second job doing alterations in the evenings after Kofi finally slept. Work she'd taught herself from online tutorials on a second-hand phone with a cracked screen. Her hands ached constantly, but her son grew fat-cheeked and strong, and there were nights she caught herself laughing, actually laughing, at the sound of his first attempts at words. She told herself this was her life now, a small room, a borrowed cot, a son who was the only family she had left. She tried more than once to find out what had happened to Malik. She searched his name online. She asked at the barber shop if anyone remembered the car that came for him. Every answer led nowhere. It was as though he had been erased, or as though someone with far more power than a travelling logistics guy had made very sure that he could not be found. She did not know that across town, behind the gates of a compound most people in the neighbourhood only ever glimpsed from the street, Malik had spent that entire year in something between a gilded prison and a fight for his life. His real name was not Malik. It was Kwame Osei, and he was the only surviving son of Marcus Osei, the founder and CEO of one of the largest black-owned real estate and development firms on the East Coast, a man whose influence stretched into City Hall, into boardrooms, into the kind of political rooms most people never got to see the inside of. Kwame had used a different name for one reason only: to escape for a few months the crushing weight of an arranged business merger his father had been engineering by pushing him toward marrying into a rival development family. He had wanted, for once in his life, to be an ordinary man who fell in love the ordinary way, away from cameras and business dinners and his father's expectations. He found that with Amara, working her coffee shop counter, laughing at his bad jokes. And then, in the middle of the night, his father's security team found him. He did not go willingly. He fought. He shouted Amara's name until his voice broke. But 4 grown men in suits are not easily refused by one, and by morning he was locked inside his father's estate, while the old man informed him, with the flat calm of a man accustomed to being obeyed, that the merger would proceed as planned, and that the girl from the coffee shop would be paid to disappear if she ever came looking. Except no one ever came looking for her, because the money was never delivered, because his father's most trusted fixer, a man named Osei, no relation, just a man who'd taken the family name as a mark of loyalty decades earlier, pocketed the payment meant to silence Amara and told his boss the matter was handled. Kwame spent the next year in a war of wills with his own father, refusing the merger, refusing to show up to galas, refusing to speak to the woman he was being pushed toward, until the old man, his health failing faster than anyone outside the family knew, finally began to understand that his son would rather lose the company than lose the woman he'd left behind. It was only from his hospital bed, 4 weeks before that stormy night on Amara's parents' porch, that Marcus Osei called his son to his side and told him the truth. The payment meant to send Amara away had never reached her, which meant, if she was even still alive, still in the city, she might still be out there. Or she might have moved on entirely, married someone else, forgotten him completely. There was no way to know. Kwame did not wait for his father's condition to stabilize before he began his search. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is not going where you thought it would. And that is exactly why we need you to hit that subscribe button, because the next twist is bigger than anything that's happened yet. Back in her corner of the city, Amara's life had quietly, stubbornly begun to rebuild itself. Kofi was walking now, chasing the neighbour's cat across the parking lot behind the restaurant, saying his first real words, which made the regulars at the counter laugh with delight despite themselves. Amara had saved enough to rent a single studio apartment of her own, small but hers, with a deadbolt on the door that she alone controlled, a detail that mattered more to her than anyone who hadn't lived through that night on the porch could ever understand. Her mother came to see her once, quietly, without her father's knowledge, and stood in the doorway crying, asking to hold her grandson. Amara let her. She was not ready to forgive, not fully, but she also understood something her mother clearly did not yet grasp about herself. That surviving does not require you to stay angry forever, only long enough to become strong enough not to need anyone's forgiveness to feel whole. It was on an ordinary Tuesday, the sky a flat, merciless blue, traffic noise rising and falling around her like a tide, that Amara heard the first murmur ripple down the block, a convoy. Black SUVs, more than anyone in the neighbourhood had ever seen together at once, rolling slow and deliberate down the narrow street, drawing every eye from the barber shop stoop to the bus stop on the corner. People stopped what they were doing. The regulars abandoned their coffee to stand at the window. Kids were pulled close by nervous mothers. In a neighbourhood like this, a convoy like that meant only one thing. Someone important, someone with power, was coming, and power rarely showed up unannounced for good news. Amara had Kofi balanced on her hip, a stack of folded laundry tucked under her other arm, and she felt something tighten in her chest that she could not name. Not fear exactly, something stranger. Something that made the hair on her arms rise, though the afternoon was warm. The convoy slowed as it reached the block outside the restaurant. Doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out first, forming a loose perimeter, their eyes scanning the street with the kind of trained alertness that made the whole block fall into an uneasy hush. Then, from the centre vehicle, a man stepped out, and everyone watching seemed to inhale at once. He was taller than Amara remembered. Broader through the shoulders, dressed in clothing far finer than anything she had ever seen him wear, but the moment his eyes found hers across that street, 3 years fell away in an instant, and Amara felt the laundry slip from her arm onto the sidewalk, because there was no mistaking that face, no mistaking those eyes, no mistaking the man who had once walked her home after her shift and remembered that she hated the smell of overripe mangoes. It was him, it was Malik. Except every single person watching his security detail part for him like water around a stone, understood in that instant that Malik had never been his real name at all. Take a breath with me, because I promise you, this story is only getting started. And if your heart is doing what mine is right now, drop a comment below and tell me honestly, do you think he's here for her? Or is there something even darker waiting underneath all of this? For a long moment, neither of them moved. The street noise had died down to almost nothing. Every neighbour and regular and child, frozen in the strange electricity of the moment, sensing without being told that they were witnessing something that would be talked about on that block for years to come. Amara's mouth had gone completely dry. Kofi, sensing the tension in his mother's body, buried his face against her neck and went still. It was Kwame who moved first. He walked toward her slowly, and Amara noticed that his security did not follow, that he had raised one hand slightly to hold them back, wanting, it seemed, to close this distance alone. When he was close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the way 3 years had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with his skin and everything to do with whatever he had lived through, he stopped. His eyes moved from her face down to the small boy clinging to her shoulder, and something in his expression cracked open entirely. "Amara," he said, and his voice broke on her name the same way it had, unknown to her, on the night they dragged him away. "I have been looking for you for 3 years." She did not answer right away. Too many things were fighting for space inside her chest at once. Relief, fury, grief, disbelief, and beneath all of it, a small, humiliated ache at how long she had spent defending him in her own mind against a neighbourhood that called him a coward, only to have no idea whether he deserved that defence at all. "You left," she finally said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended, sharp enough that a few nearby onlookers visibly flinched. "You left in the night. No word, no note, nothing. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What people said about me, what my own family did to me because of you?" "I didn't leave," Kwame said. "I was taken. My father's people came for me while you slept. I fought them, Amara. I fought them until they had to carry me out. And I have spent 3 years trying to undo what my father did, trying to find you, trying to make sure the money he sent to make you disappear actually reached you, only to learn 4 weeks ago that it never did, that his own man stole it and let you disappear into nothing, thinking I would simply move on and forget you existed. Amara felt her knees weaken, and she was grateful, suddenly, for the solid warmth of Kofi's small body anchoring her upright. "Your father," she repeated slowly. What are you? What is all this?" Her hand gestured weakly at the convoy, the men in suits, the black SUVs gleaming in the afternoon sun. Kwame's jaw tightened. "My father is Marcus Osei." A murmur rippled through the small crowd at the name. Even here that name carried weight, carried history, carried the kind of recognition reserved for people whose company built half the skyline downtown. "He's been sick for a while now, which makes me," Kwame continued, "the one running things at the company these days, whether I was ready for it or not." The crowd's murmur grew louder now, disbelief and recognition tangled together, because the girl they had watched fold laundry and wipe down counters, the girl the neighborhood gossip had shredded for 3 years, was standing on a public sidewalk being addressed by the son of one of the city's most powerful developers. Somewhere near the back of the small crowd, Amara's father had appeared, drawn by the commotion like everyone else, and the colour drained entirely from his face as understanding dawned on him in real time. If you're feeling that shift in the air the way I am, comment below and tell me, if you were Amara, standing in front of everyone who doubted you, what would you do first? While you think about that, make sure you've hit like on this video, because we are far from finished. Kwame's eyes moved past Amara toward the crowd, and when they landed on her father, something hard and controlled entered his expression. The look, Amara realized with a small jolt, of a man who had learned exactly how to wield power and was now choosing, deliberately, whether or not to use it. "You are her father," Kwame said. It was not a question. Amara's father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Yes, I am. You put her out of your home," Kwame said, "with an infant in the rain, because you were ashamed of what other people might say about your family." His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. The silence around them was so complete that every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "While she suffered for a decision that was made by my father's people, not by her, and certainly by me, since I was locked behind a gate across town, unable to send so much as a text." Amara's father's mouth worked soundlessly. Around them, the crowd's whispers had shifted entirely, no longer aimed at Amara, but circling now around her father, around the family that had cast out a woman who turned out to be standing, however unexpectedly, beside the heir to one of the city's biggest companies. But Amara found, standing there, that she did not want to watch her father humiliated on that sidewalk the way she had once been humiliated. Whatever he had done, however deeply it had cut her, some part of her still remembered him teaching her to ride a bike in the church parking lot, still remembered him proud and laughing at her graduation. She stepped slightly in front of Kwame, breaking the tension. "Stop," she said quietly. "This isn't why I'm standing here. I don't need you to punish him. I needed once for someone to believe me, and no one did, not until now, and not because of anything I did differently. That's not justice. That's just power showing up late." She looked between the two men, her father pale and shaking, Kwame watching her with something that looked almost like awe. "I raised my son myself. I built a life out of nothing. I don't need either of you to hand me my dignity back. I already found it on my own." The crowd, if it was possible, went even quieter. Kwame studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge entirely, gone soft in a way that made something in Amara's chest ache with the memory of who he had been before all of this. "You're right," he said. "You don't need anything handed to you. But I would like to ask for something, if you'll let me, not for the company, not for the name I have to carry now, just for myself and for him." His eyes dropped to Kofi, who had lifted his head from Amara's shoulder and was now watching the tall stranger with open, unguarded curiosity. Is he? His name is Kofi," Amara said, and for the first time since the convoy had rolled up the block, her voice trembled. He turned 3 years old 2 weeks ago. Quime's composure, the careful boardroom stillness he had clearly spent 3 years learning to wear like armor, finally broke entirely. He pressed the back of his hand hard against his mouth, and when he lowered it, his eyes were wet. 3 years, he whispered. I have a son, and I have missed 3 years of him. Now, before we go any further, if this story has you feeling something right now, whatever that something is, type it in the comments. I want to know. And if it's affecting you the way it's affecting me, hit that like button, because stories like this deserve to be seen by more people who need exactly this today. What followed in the days after was not the fairy tale sweep some in the crowd expected. Kwame did not simply take Amara and Kofi away in his convoy that same afternoon, and Amara would not have allowed it even if he tried. She had learned in 3 brutal years of surviving on her own not to trust the arrival of anyone, however sincere, however wealthy, however wronged, without first understanding exactly what she was walking into. Instead, Kwame stayed in the neighborhood for 2 weeks. He rented a modest room above the barber shop, the very block where he had once lived under a false name, and each morning he walked to Afua's restaurant, not as an executive, not as a man trailed by security, but simply as Kwame, sitting at the counter where Amara worked, watching his son chase the neighbor's cat through the parking lot, slowly, patiently, rebuilding a trust that had been shattered by forces neither of them had controlled. It was not easy. There were nights Amara cried from the sheer overwhelming weight of it all, the anger she still carried for the year of silence, even though she now understood it hadn't been his choice. The fear that this was somehow a dream that would collapse the moment she let herself believe in it. The worry about what it would mean to raise her son inside a world of executives and boardrooms and rivals, far more dangerous than neighborhood gossip. Kwame, to his credit, never pushed. He answered every question she asked, however painful, however late at night she asked it. He told her about the hospital bed conversation with his father, about the fixer named Osei, who had stolen the money meant to buy her silence, and who Kwame, upon learning the truth, had fired within the hour. He told her about the arranged merger his father had tried to force on him, a deal he had refused so completely that his father's own health, according to the doctors, had begun to decline further under the stress of the standoff, a fact that left Kwame carrying a guilt and kills Amara slowly came to understand was every bit as heavy as her own. But it was on the 12th night, sitting together on the front steps of the restaurant while Kofi slept inside, that the deeper truth finally surfaced. The twist that neither of them had seen coming, the one piece of the story that reframed everything that came before it. Because it was not only the fixer who had known where Amara was all along. Kwame's mother, his father's first wife, quietly sidelined within the family business years earlier, had, in fact, tracked Amara's location within the first 6 months after Kwame's disappearance. She had done so not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate, misguided hope of protecting her son from a merger he despised, believing that if Amara simply vanished from Kwame's reach entirely, uncontacted, unreachable, he would eventually accept the arranged partnership and secure the family's financial future. She had intercepted every message Kwame tried to send in secret. She had quietly made sure that anyone who might carry word back to him was redirected, misinformed, or paid to stay silent. It was not his father's cruelty alone that had kept 2 people apart and let a child grow up without his father. It had been a mother's desperate, twisted love for her own son, willing to sacrifice another woman's entire life to protect what she believed was Kwame's best future. Amara sat in stunned silence when Kwame finished telling her, the full shape of the last 3 years finally visible all at once. Not one villain, but a tangle of fear and power and desperate love, each person certain they were protecting someone, each decision compounding a wound that had nearly consumed her entire life. "Does she know you're here?" Amara finally asked. "Your mother?" Kwame nodded slowly. "She does now. I told her everything, the day I found out what the fixer had done. She cried, she begged my forgiveness. I have not given it to her yet. I don't know if I can, not fully, not yet." He looked at Amara in the porch light. "But I understand something now that I didn't before all of this. Sometimes the people who hurt us most convince themselves they're protecting us. It doesn't undo the harm, but it changes how you carry the anger. Everything in you right now is probably screaming to know what happens next, and I promise we are almost there. But first, if you love unexpected twists like the one we just uncovered, this is exactly the moment to hit subscribe, because stories like this one are what this channel is built around. The final test came 3 days later, when Kwame's mother arrived on the block herself, unannounced, stepping out of a modest sedan with none of the fanfare of her son's original Convoy. She stood at the edge of the restaurant parking lot, an older woman with tired eyes and hands that would not stop wringing the strap of her purse, and asked quietly if she might be permitted to see her grandson. Amara could have refused. Every instinct honed by 3 years of hard-won survival told her she had every right to. But she thought of her own mother, standing crying in her doorway months earlier, asking for the same thing, and something in her softened despite everything. "You may see him," Amara said, "but you do not get his trust simply because you are his blood. That you will have to earn, the same way I earned everything I have." The older woman nodded, tears sliding freely down her face, and when Kofi toddled out from behind Amara's legs, curious as ever, and reached up without hesitation to take the stranger's offered hand, something in the entire tense, complicated tangle of the last 3 years finally, quietly began to heal. There is one more thing worth telling before this story closes, because life, unlike the folk tales we grew up hearing, rarely wraps every thread into a neat bow, and this one didn't either. Amara did not move into Kwame's world immediately. She did not give up the small studio apartment with the deadbolt she controlled, not for many months, because that deadbolt had come to mean something to her that no amount of wealth or title could replace. The simple, hard-earned knowledge that she would never again be a person who depended entirely on someone else's mercy to survive. Kwame, to his enormous credit, never once pressured her to hurry. He built a life around her pace instead of expecting her to build one around his. Her father, humbled in ways the neighborhood whispers could never fully capture, came to her one evening alone without her mother and stood outside her door for nearly 20 minutes before he found the courage to knock. When Amara opened it, he did not ask for forgiveness right away. He simply said, "I was wrong. I let my fear of what people would say matter more than my own daughter, and I have thought about that every single night since I closed that door on you." It was not a magic sentence that erased 3 years of pain, but it was a beginning, and Amara, tired of carrying anger that had never once made her stronger, chose to let it be one. A full year later, on that same block where the convoy had first arrived, Amara and Kwame got married, not with the pomp of a boardroom, but with the simplicity Amara had insisted on, surrounded by the people who had actually stood beside her when she had nothing. Afua, who cried through the entire ceremony, the regulars from the restaurant who had once whispered about her and now wept tears of pride instead, and standing quietly at the edge of it all, her mother and father, together, watching their daughter marry a man who had spent 3 years fighting his way back to her. This is the part where I ask you the biggest favour of all. If this story moved you even a little, hit subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and tell me in the comments the one lesson you're taking away from Amara's journey, because I promise you I read every single one. What Amara carried away from those 3 brutal years was not bitterness, though she would have been entitled to it. It was something quieter and far more durable. The understanding that the people who abandon you in your darkest moment rarely get to decide who you become afterward. That belongs to you alone. She had been thrown out into the rain with nothing but a screaming infant and a promise to survive. And in the years that followed, she had built something no one could ever take from her again. A life earned entirely on her own terms. Strong enough that when the convoy finally arrived, carrying the truth she'd waited years to hear, she did not need it to complete her. She simply let it join a story she had already, quietly, magnificently, finished writing for herself.